For 10 years, I lived beside a man who treated me like a stranger. His name was Daniel, and to everyone who knew us, we were the perfect married couple. We attended family dinners together, smiled for photographs, hosted Christmas parties, and lived in a beautiful house in one of the wealthiest neighborhoods in the city. People often told me how lucky I was. They saw Daniel as successful, intelligent, and devoted. They never saw what happened after the front door closed. For 10 years, Daniel never touched me. Not once. There was no kiss before bed. No embrace when I came home, no hand on my shoulder. We slept in separate bedrooms, and whenever I tried to ask why, he always gave me the same answer. I'm tired. At first I believed him. Then I thought perhaps something was wrong with me. I spent years wondering whether I wasn't attractive enough, loving enough, or good enough to be his wife. I changed my clothes, my hair, my entire personality. I became quieter, more patient, and more understanding. Nothing changed. Daniel remained distant, yet strangely, he never asked for a divorce. Whenever I mentioned separation, his expression would become cold. No, he would say, we made a commitment, a commitment. That word became a prison. I eventually stopped asking questions. I built a life around his silence. I worked from home, volunteered at a local shelter, and spent most evenings reading alone. Then one ordinary Tuesday morning, everything changed. A lawyer named Mr. Harris arrived at my house. He looked uncomfortable as he sat across from me. Mrs. Carter, I'm afraid I have some extraordinary. You placed several documents on the table. You have inherited an estate valued at approximately $400 million. I stared at him. I'm sorry, what, $400 million? My hands began to shake. The inheritance came from a woman I barely knew, my late Aunt Eleanor, a distant relative who had built a massive investment company before disappearing from public life. I had met her only a handful of times. Apparently, she had never forgotten me. She had left everything to me. Stocks, properties, private investments. Company's cash. The total value was close to $400 million. For the first time in 10 years, I saw something change in Daniel. Fear. He entered the room after Mr. Harris left and looked at me differently, not like a wife, not like a stranger, like someone who had suddenly become extremely important. So it's true, he asked. Yes, how much? Approximately $400 million. He sat down slowly. For the next several days, Daniel became strangely attentive. He asked whether I needed anything. He offered to accompany me to meetings. He suddenly wanted us to travel together one evening. He even stood beside me in the kitchen and said, maybe we should start over. I almost laughed. After 10 years, he looked away. I made mistakes. No, I said quietly, you made choices. He had no answer. Then something happened that changed everything. I discovered that Daniel had known about my aunt's fortune before I did. Not only had he known, he had been waiting for it. I found emails between Daniel and one of his financial advisors. They discussed my aunt's health. They discussed her estate. They even discussed what Daniel might receive if I died before him. I felt sick. The man who had refused to touch me for 10 years had apparently been planning his financial future around my inheritance. I confronted him. You knew. Daniel became pale. I can explain. You knew about the money. Yes, how long? He remained silent. That isn't the worst part, I said. He looked at me. What is you were waiting for me to inherit it? Daniel lowered his eyes. Then he said something I will never forget. I never married you for love. Those words destroyed something inside me. But they also freed me. I filed for divorce. Daniel fought desperately. He claimed our marriage was real. He claimed he had always cared about me. He even told our families that I had abandoned him because I had become rich. For the first time, I stopped caring what people believed. The divorce process began. Then, 3 weeks before our final court hearing, Daniel disappeared. I received a phone call from the hospital. He had suffered a serious medical emergency. I didn't know what to feel: anger, sadness, pity. Maybe all three. I went to see him. He looked completely different, weak. Pale human. For the first time in 10 years, there was no arrogance in his eyes. He asked me to sit down. I owe you the truth, he whispered. I said nothing. He reached into the drawer beside his bed and handed me a sealed envelope. My lawyer will give you this if I don't survive. I stared at it. What is it? My final letter. 2 days later, Daniel died. I sat alone in my house that evening with the envelope in my hands. I almost threw it away, but eventually I opened it. The first line made my heart stop. My wife, I know you will hate me. You have every right to. I continued reading. Daniel confessed that his distance had never been about attraction. It had been about fear. 10 years earlier, before our wedding, he had discovered that he had a serious medical condition that made intimacy extremely difficult for him. He had been ashamed, terrified that I would leave him. So instead of telling me the truth, he pushed me away. But there was more. He had also discovered that my aunt, Eleanor, had been investigating him. She knew about his financial problems. She knew he was close to bankruptcy, and she knew he had originally considered marrying me because of my family connections. Eleanor had confronted him before our wedding. She made him promise never to take advantage of me. Daniel wrote that he had intended to confess everything. But fear took control. Years passed, his debt grew. And when he eventually learned that Eleanor was leaving her fortune to me, his old greed returned. He admitted that he had planned to manipulate me after the inheritance. Then came the sentence that shocked me most. I never touched you because I was ashamed of the man I had become. I stopped reading for 10 years. I had believed I wasn't enough. I had blamed myself, but the truth had never been about me. The final paragraph said, you deserved honesty. I gave you silence. You deserved love. I gave you distance. I cannot undo 10 years of your life, but I hope one day you understand that none of this was because you were unworthy. I cried that night, not because I wanted him back, but because I finally understood how much time I had wasted blaming myself for someone else's inability to be honest. I inherited $400 million. But the money wasn't the greatest thing I gained. I gained the truth, and with that truth came freedom. I sold the house where Daniel and I had spent 10 silent years. I kept one small photograph from our wedding, not because I missed him, but because it reminded me of the woman I had been, a woman who spent years believing she needed to earn someone's love. I was no longer that woman. I used part of my inheritance to create a foundation for people struggling with financial abuse, emotional manipulation, and difficult marriages. And I promised myself something simple: never again would I remain somewhere just because other people thought I belonged there. Money can change your life, but sometimes the most valuable inheritance isn't wealth. Sometimes it's the truth that finally teaches you your worth.